So my name is Tommy DeMisa. I am the Director of Strategic Alliances for the Vanguard Insurance Agency. Vanguard is a 21-year-old boutique employee benefits firm. Our focus over the years has always been on educating our groups of employees. We consider education a real tenet of what our firm is all about, and we believe that an educated employee is really empowered to make consumer-driven decisions. So our tagline is educating employers one employee at a time. And with that focus, we've just recently enhanced our product offering by aligning with a company called VEES, which is a benefits management platform that has already begun to improve the user experience for both our employers and their employees. And we're always a forward-thinking firm, and out of that has come the Vanguard Employer Education Series, which is what you're attending right now. And typically we run these meetings on a bi-weekly basis. However, we wanted to get this information in front of you as soon as possible, so we kind of changed our calendar around. So Ed McWilliams is joining us today to speak about this very important topic, which we'll get into in a few minutes. But we really feel that the folks that we serve are benefiting from attending these meetings, and we've gotten real positive feedback. I've started to record this session, so if you have any follow-up and you want to see this after the fact, I put my contact information in the chat box, and it's also below my picture. For today, if you wouldn't mind, as I'm sure a lot of us have been on Zoom meetings over the past number of months, if you wouldn't mind staying on mute just in case there's any background noise. And by all means, if you have a question, feel free to come off of mute and say, excuse me, Tommy, or excuse Ed, and we'll answer those questions. Otherwise, as always, you can put those questions in the chat box. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I will just read a quick bio on Ed, and Ed, I'm just going to give you access to share, so we're prepared to do that.
Okay, great.
All right. You should be able to take care of that now. So Ed McWilliams has been with Sereni & Associates here on Long Island for the last 7 years and is a director in the firm's tax and advisory practice. Ed focuses on providing services to middle market businesses across a variety of industries, but with a major focus in early stage startup companies. He brings a background of diverse knowledge base and really positions his clients to benefit from his strategic focus on solutions to their complex business challenges, not just tax, but business consulting as well. Aside from his work at the firm, Ed has been quoted in Newsday, Long Island Business News, and is a frequent contributor on FiOS One's program, Money and Main Street. We've asked Ed to talk, as I mentioned earlier, about President Trump's executive order, which was entitled the Memorandum on Deferring Payroll Tax Obligations in Light of the Ongoing COVID-19 Disaster. So without really anything further, Ed, we're looking at your email. If you just want to switch out of that real quick.
Sorry.
That's okay. Without further ado, Ed McWilliams of Sereni & Associates. And Ed, floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, Tommy. Let me just finish this email because I'm getting an urgent one come in. As you know, the fun never stops over here. Okay, great. So, Tommy, thank you for that great introduction. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. I appreciate the floor, appreciate working with Tommy. Tommy has been a sponsor of our Imagine Awards at Sereni & Associates for a number of years and a great friend of the firm. So when he reached out to us, I was very, very happy to go through this and give as much information as I can right now. So that all being said, just want to give a quick welcome here. So this information is based on everything that is current as of today, August 26th. I probably last checked at about 11 a.m., so within the last hour. One major thing that we've noticed a lot with these programs is things change a lot very, very quickly, very, very rapidly. So I always like to kind of say when we're giving the information as of, because by this afternoon, it could be dated. Everything that we are providing here is based on our interpretations of the executive order and the underlying law and other sources, so just keep that in mind. This is informational only, cannot be used to contest any IRS or other penalties or assessments. I will have some time at the end available to answer any questions that may pop up. And just again, thank everybody for their attendance. Normally I do a little shameless self-promotion here, but Tommy took care of that for me, so thank you very much, Tommy. My email address is on this slide should you have any questions and or wish to follow up. So that said, let's kind of get into the white meat of what's going on here. So on August 8th, 2020, which was a Saturday for anybody who's paying attention, President Trump signed 4 executive orders basically as a result of a self-imposed deadline of trying to get another stimulus package through. There was a House version, there was a Senate version, both of which were markedly different size, scope, scale, and programs. They were, the term I heard was unmergeable. They tried to negotiate. I'm not going to get into the political side of all of it. It clearly failed, and as a result, President Trump said, okay, I'm going to issue some executive orders to try to provide relief where I can. 4 major executive orders came out. A payroll tax deferral, some on unemployment insurance, some on assistance to renters and homeowners, and some for some student loan payment relief. We will be focusing today largely on the payroll tax deferral. I do have a note on the unemployment insurance and maybe 4 or 5 words on the renters, homeowners, and student loan relief. More just informational that I came across on my travels. So when Tommy first asked us about this webinar, one of the things I said was, hey, they haven't released a whole lot of information yet. We had the executive order, but that's about it. But conceptually speaking, considering it's supposed to go into effect as of Monday or Tuesday of next week, I would anticipate that we'll have some guidance by Wednesday and be able to really give information. Well, lo and behold, as of last night, still not a whole lot released. And as I was talking, I said to Tommy, well, I'm going to give a webinar that's basically like Seinfeld. It's a webinar about nothing, meaning that I have a lot of the high-level information that I'll be able to give, but I also have nothing of real technical substance and or implementation I can give. So I want to give as much information on the nothing that we have and spend a half hour educating and entertaining you on my nothing, but also realize that there's a lot of inherent limitations that currently exist. And I wish I had more to give you. I'm not holding out on you or trying to be intentionally vague just because, I'm trying to lure you in to work with me, but rather there's just not a lot to give. It's a webinar about nothing to a certain degree.
Webinar about nothing.
Just want to make sure everybody stays on mute if possible. So I heard a little background noise there. Just really do appreciate that as we go on. So the payroll tax deferral itself, as I mentioned, it called to be effective as of September 1st, 2020, which is Tuesday of next week. And what this allowed was for employers to defer, but not eliminate, Social Security withholding on employee payroll that is paid for the period of September 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2020. Note the emphasis there, defer but not eliminate. And I think that deferral itself is what's really causing some of the controversy here. The deferral, for those who are interested in this, is being done under the same authority that the change from April 15th to July 15th, the tax deadline was done. It's using the same code section, the same authority as of a federally declared disaster area allows the Treasury Secretary to defer certain deadlines. So technically speaking, they are deferring the deadline for the withholding and payment of these taxes. But that's leading to just, and I will highlight, questions on questions that ultimately breed more questions. But the conceptual here is a deferral but not elimination of Social Security withholding on the employee payroll for that period. One item that when it first came out that was a little unclear, but we've gotten a consensus, if nothing else, on has been that this only applies to the Social Security taxes, does not apply to Medicare tax, which for 2020 is 6.2% of employee wages up to $137,700. The deferral itself, per the order, should apply to employees making less than $104,000 per year. The order says, and I have it in quotes, generally less than $4,000 on a bi-weekly basis is what is listed inside of the executive order. Why do I have that in quotes? Because I think one of the open points that people have is that's a very vague statement. Normally when you're implementing laws like this, you deal in absolutes. So what does generally less than mean? Is that a hard ceiling cap? Is there a phase out? And it only covers bi-weekly as listed in the executive order. That extrapolates to $2,000 on a weekly basis, $4,333 on a semi-monthly basis, or $8,667 on a monthly basis. But the order doesn't cover any of those. It just says that generally less than $4,000 bi-weekly. So, there's a lot of uncertainty as to amounts and items, how it's going to really work. The order calls for the Treasury Secretary to issue regulations and guidance on this implementation. As you kind of noted when I first started this, it hasn't been issued yet. There is no guidance yet. Right now, we're all going off of the same 1.5-page executive order and an interview on Fox Business News on August 12th or 13th. That's not particularly binding in any way, but sometimes you have to dance with the girl that you brought to a degree. So we're really trying to go with what we have and how we have it, trying to give people the best information that we can right now. But this is what the deferral is designed to be: an employee side deferral for all the Social Security tax for the amounts less than listed there. So it's kind of simple, almost comically simple when you say it that way. Okay, just don't withhold it. But that now breeds tons of questions that are going to go with it. The lack of guidance today makes it nearly impossible that any payroll processor, which is nearly how everybody universally does their payroll, will be able to actually have a September 1st, 2020 start date. Payroll processors have been working great with all of the changes that have occurred in the past 6 months. This has been, on a side and a personal note, just a crazy 6 months of rapid and continual changes. And normally when you're changing tax law or federal programs, there's a lead-up period to it to get your systems ready, get your thought processes ready, understand everything that's going on. Here, we've all been learning on the fly as we go through this process. And I commend the payroll processors for their quick agility to try to implement as many things as they can that just come out without a lot of lead time. But right now, without any guidance, I've seen an open communication from ADP, whom is the largest processor, and I'm sure others have a very similar note pattern, that until they see guidance, there's not a lot that they can really do. So even if the guidance came out today, on a practical term, I don't know if you'd be ready to do it until probably a week plus afterwards, and even that may have a level of optimism that exists to it. So keep that in mind. Every day that the guidance gets delays is every day there's a practical limitation that's going to exist as a result of this. I made mention that this Treasury Secretary, one of the things we're going off of is some interviews that he's given. Now, interviews do not hold any real weight of law, but they're going to give what the intentions are to a degree. So on August 12th, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin indicated that the participation in this is going to be, quote unquote, completely optional for employers. That is an interesting statement because optional is an interesting word. You don't participate, look at it from the employee side for a second. You don't participate and you're going to have a potential, among other things, an employee relations issue. The employee is not really going to care about the nuts and bolts implementation or your risk as an employer, but rather they're going to say, hey, I was told that I'm going to have an additional 6.2% in my check for the next 4 months. What gives? Where's my extra money? And part of the thing that I think accountants and professional advisors and payroll processors have been shouting as loud as they can from the rooftops since this came out was, this is a deferral, not an elimination. A lot of people just see less taxes taken out. They look at taxes kind of like the great mystery of the unknown. And people are going to say, oh, the tax wasn't taken out, I must not owe it, not realizing deferral, not elimination. So that's why I keep stressing that, because I think everybody that, the more we stress that point, the clearer it becomes across to everybody that, hey, this is not getting rid of. I have one client that the day after this passed got probably 25 emails from different employees who said, all right, I want to up my 401k withholding because I'm going to have to pay less Social Security tax right now. Well, that's great. Always up your 401k holding if you can afford it. Great financial advice. But, come January, potentially, maybe later in the year, nobody actually knows, someone's going to owe this tax to somebody somehow. And if it's behind a 401k, that could present an issue. The uncertainty is breeding a lot of risk for many employers. Here's I think, number one question from a advisory standpoint that I have right now. I don't have an answer for it. The obligation for the payment of the deferred tax. If we think about employment taxes are subject to the trust fund recovery penalty. We've all heard the stories about payroll processors who process payrolls for employers say they're depositing the taxes, and then all of a sudden, a couple years later, it turns out, nope, the owner was pocketing it, and the employer is still on the risk. Not only is the employer on the risk, the responsible party of the employer is on the risk. So do you want to have a personal obligation for this deferred tax in some way? It is a trust fund tax. It's employee withholding. So, that risk really is paramount for a lot of employers in understanding that. What about an employee that changes jobs? So I have someone that I did not, withhold for October and November. In December, he says, I've had enough of being an accountant. I'm going to go be a farmer somewhere, which I can understand pretty much right now. He now goes and has a whole completely different job. Well, I didn't withhold, but I owe it somehow. It was deferred. It wasn't eliminated. How do I pay that? Who pays that? Where does it get paid? When does it get paid? That's a huge risk. Imagine, you have employees you defer withholding for, and as a result of the overall economic circumstance, unfortunately, maybe your business does not survive or you have to cut a significant number of employees. It's not an unrealistic scenario. We're doing everything we can to help avoid that with everybody we can, but now, who's stuck holding the bag on all of that? It's a tremendous risk, a tremendous question that people are worried about. And I think that's the number one piece of guidance is the mechanism of the deferral and the indemnification of employers and or the risk of employers. That risk right there is the number one factor why my current advice for employers has been, you definitely want to wait and see, and you want to see how that shakes out. That's going to be the number one thing that determines participation within this program. The second item, something I touched on very briefly prior. This is the deferral. Again, shouting from the rooftops. This tax is going to be owed at some point in the future. So now we're going to start saddling employees who may be living check to check and need this extra cash flow right now with a large bill in 2021. How are they going to feel about that? Does every employee itself even want to participate, right? Is there an employee opt-in, opt-out? How is that going to end up working? You know, I may wish to defer, but Tommy may not. It's a question that I don't know has been addressed of the employee opt-in, opt-out. Now, if you have to manage that too, well, guess what? The implementation just got, 10 times more complicated on an employee by employee opt-in, opt-out basis. Managing and recording that is going to be, difficult, if nothing else, and something that I would be very concerned about. Lastly, something that I've spoken with and I've seen mentioned in a couple places, and sometimes I think we as advisors get monsters under the bed syndrome and or trying to think about every worst case scenario, possible scenario. So the withholding from employee checks is generally, and just note, I am not a lawyer, this is not legal advice, but just my travels and conversations I've had, employee withholding are generally governed by Department of Labor laws, which are generally governed by the state themselves. There are certain federal laws, but then there are state laws that can supersede that. Could there be state legal limitations on the coming and or the going? Meaning most states have it that a legal and allowable withholding on employee checks is current period taxes. Well, does this deferral now make that no longer a current tax due and therefore actually not optional for the employee? I think we're getting technical and nitty there, but I think it's a question that bears at least some thought process. And the other side of the coin of that is many states don't allow for retroactive or ex post facto deductions. So now this deferral, if I have to get it in the future, that could be forbidden under state labor laws too. I think that's a terrific question. If you want to know where I thought this was going to face a legal challenge that was ultimately going to make this fall apart, it was on that level. I was really surprised, I still am, that I haven't seen much about that. Again, maybe it's some monsters under the bed, but I started thinking just about employer risk. That's where my mind is always going to go to that level of those. And there are questions beyond that. What if someone works for two employers and their combined compensation is over the $4,000 on a bi-weekly basis, but each employer only knows about what their compensation is. So I have two jobs that both pay me $3,000 every 2 weeks. Well, under the deferral for each individual employer, I'm eligible. But if I add those two together, all of a sudden I'm not. How's that going to interact with each other? The reporting of it on W-2s, on 941s. I mean, it's just, this is a seismic shift. Now, there have been payroll tax, Social Security changes in the past. We think back to 2008 or 9. That was one of the stimulus items that was done, was a decrease in the rate from 6.2% to 4.2%. But that was an outright elimination, not a deferral. So it's harder to look back upon that because an executive order, there's no authority to eliminate a tax under an executive order. The only order can really come from a congressional item. It's the power of the person, basic civics when it comes to that. You can't just do that. So considering the difficulty in getting a stimulus bill together now, who knows how that's going to play out there. So a lot of questions. Many employers have confirmed that as of right now, they'll be opting out. And I think the publicizing that, hey, the big guys are doing this is going to be important for the small guys, because back to my point of employee relations, the employee's not going to really care. But if you say, listen, this is the way we have to do it, and other companies are, we all heard from others growing up, if Tommy jumped off a bridge, would you jump off with him? So just because someone else is doing it doesn't mean that I should, but I think the group thinks sometimes gives you a firmer leg to stand on, and know there's always the technical versus the practical, and I think that's where that goes into place. But Walmart, Macy's, Procter & Gamble have all said as of right now they're opting out. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce sent a letter to Congress and other leaders in Washington saying that they believe many will opt out, along with, I think, 30 trade associations with like retailers and manufacturers. So a lot of momentum of, hey, unless you guys make this work exactly the way that we want it to, it's not going to do it. And gun to my head right now, if September 1st comes and we're still at the same level of guidance, I would probably advise that. And depending on how the guidance breaks out and obligations, I would err on that side unless everything falls into the exact way and the employer is at no risk whatsoever. The minute you start putting an employer at risk for this, what's the benefit for them? I don't see it working out for them.
And if I could jump in for a second, and you may have addressed most of this already, just with the basic lack of guidance that's really available at our fingertips. But Cynthia Merkel has a question here in the chat. As a payroll provider, I read into that as a service bureau. Do they need to leave it up to the individual employee, or is the employer or the employer, and is it an all or nothing scenario? But I'm guessing from just listening to you, I'll let you answer, but we don't know. We just
don't know. The specifics of all of that really are probably going to fall out, not come in the regulations. Don't even know if that's going to happen there, because I've done a lot of work on PPP loans, when this first came out, right? And a common refrain I kept saying was, we'll probably see regulations on this. We'll probably see regulations on this. We'll probably see regulations on this. Well, I haven't seen a lot of regulations on a lot of things I thought I would when it came to that. And who knows what the regulations are going to say. You're asking an impossible to answer question right now. The answers aren't there to give that. You have a one-page, hey, I want to defer payroll taxes. That's all we have to go off of right now. I'm trying to raise the questions that we all as a collective group need to think about and make sure we understand before you move forward with this. I wish I had an answer for you. I just don't.
Thanks.
One other item I just want to highlight. The employer side of Social Security already has a deferral. So you think about a Social Security tax, you have the 6.2% employee, 6.2% employer. Remember that the employer side of that is already deferred under the CARES Act. That came out in March of 2020, which feels like a lifetime ago. But that deferral is there. They expanded it to allow basically everybody to do it. Originally, you couldn't do it if you got a PPP loan, which majority of employers did, but they changed it and now said everybody can. That deferral was clear, thought out, understood, and frankly, it's not a trust fund either, so less risk to the employers as a whole. So that already exists. I don't have a ton of clients that are taking advantage of it because most have said, I'm going to owe it anyway. I've been saying it's an interest-free loan. That's really how you can look at it. Some are taking advantage, some are not. I think some are very worried about month-to-month, period-to-period, that come 2022, 2023, when this has to start getting paid, they're not going to be able to. So I think that's why I've seen less traction than other programs have at this point. So that all being said, the other executive orders that came out. So it was a series of 4 executive orders that came out. Ironically, the employment insurance one probably has the most guidance on it. The DOL was able to pretty quickly talk about it. It came through a FEMA program. It was the easiest of these to actually implement. The least, the problem is the other three executive orders didn't have really any impact on employers as a whole. So the unemployment insurance calls for an additional $300 per week per employee to be drawn from FEMA funds. And then the state government could contribute an additional up to $100 per week. That's where the $400 per week number was coming in. Unsurprisingly, nearly every state has said, yeah, we're not giving any extra money. We don't have money to give. So most states are trying to just get into the $300 per week per employee, which is supposed to be retroactive to August 1st. As of August 22nd, New York has entered and been approved into the program. Employers don't have much of an action item on this. It's really only going to be employee side. So I just wanted to point it out because there's going to be some questions on it. I don't see any real employer impact as we get onto that. The student loan deferral, that has continued through the end of 2020. And the last executive order has to do with minimizing evictions, largely on residential homeowners. From my reading of it, basically it said, hey, I want you to investigate how to do this. I don't really have an answer on how to do that yet. It was an order to cabinet members. But it kind of just speaks to the rapidness of which we're trying to deploy things, of doing things without 100% guidance through and through. It's not only on this payroll tax side, but on other sides as well. So don't feel like you're being, picked on unfairly or individually. So at this point, I kind of reserve the last, 10 minutes or so for any questions or comments. I'll try to answer as best I can. Again, lack of guidance makes it hard for me to give you any real specific answers as they'll come up.
All right, so we have a question here from Delia O'Donnell. What is holding up New Jersey on the $300 application? Is that clear? Or Delia, if you want to come off mute, you're off mute. Delia, if you want to just speak to that.
Yes, I know that New York put in the application. I work with the Tech Council in a variety of states across the country. But it's not clear to me why New Jersey hasn't moved ahead with all the other announcements, including Murphy's announcements yesterday. What's holding them?
I mean, that's a political question more than anything else. I couldn't tell you as to why that's happening. It could be any number of reasons. I haven't seen anything publicized as to why that may or may not be happening.
Okay.
Okay, any additional questions? I don't have any in the chat, but if anybody has any additional questions, feel free to come off mute if we can give you any more clarity.
Again, I feel like I gave you a webinar about nothing to a degree, and I wish I had more to give, but in the end...
It took 35 minutes for you to talk about nothing, so it wasn't not the end of the world.
I'm in a Chinese restaurant waiting for my reservation right now, pretty much. That's the entirety of this webinar, give or take.
Very good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't, I can actually, Ed, can you go one slide forward? Is that where your contact info is?
It's on the...
Or is it on the beginning? All right, why don't we hang out there for a minute? So, ladies and gentlemen, if no other questions, Ed's email address is there. So if you're saving your questions for when there's more to speak about, you can reach out to him. And Ed, my expectation is if this becomes something permanent, you and I will be having a further discussion in the coming weeks about this that we can share with people. And I'm assuming you'd be okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, my intention is generally when actual substance comes out, we'll probably be hosting a webinar ourselves.
Sure. So we can plug people into the Serini version of that. That's perfect. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's my intention. Who knows what's going to happen, where, when, how. It's been an odd bit of radio silence of, hey, we're going to issue guidance on this. And then every day, people will laugh when I say this, but one of the best news sources that you could have professionally is Twitter. I have a separate Twitter handle that I use just for my tax stuff, and I follow 15, 20 accounts that really keep abreast of this stuff, because you can find instant, breaking stuff. And then you have to weed through signal to noise like you do with everything else, but people laugh when I say, yes, Twitter is where I get a lot of this stuff from, because I think that's one of the best, places to find this rapid breaking news.
Perfect. Thank you very much for pointing that out. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being here. I do want to point out, as I mentioned earlier, we run these thought leadership meetings, the Vanguard Employer Education Series, bi-weekly on Wednesdays. However, we slotted Ed's conversation in today. We do have our bi-weekly schedule next Wednesday, the 2nd. Michael Goldberg of Knockout Networking will be coming on and speaking about virtual approaches to networking and how to stay relevant in a time when we're not out there shaking hands. So you can always check in with us on that. My contact information is my email address is tdimisa, TDIMISA @vgdny.com. Should you have additional questions about today or meetings that we're going to hold in the future. And feel free to give us any sort of feedback via email that may be relevant so we can bring you the types of information that you need. So I appreciate it. But at this point, that will conclude our meeting. So have an incredible day.